Greetings again everyone, and now it's time for something a little bit new. Some of my favourite lenses to use are 2x macro lenses for how incredibly close they can get you to even the tiniest of subjects, and these super macro lenses have been popularised in recent years by Venus Optics. Well, now TTArtisan are launching their own take on the super macro lens, except this time with a tilt and shift feature too. This is their 100mm f2.8 2x macro tilt shift lens. Very interesting. Many of you will already know what a tilt shift lens is by now, but here's a recap just in case. The shift function here, up to 6mm on this lens, enables you to slightly correct your perspective for architecture photography or any other kind of shots where keeping straight lines straight is important. Yes, you can do this to your pictures in editing software too, but that will degrade your final image quality a bit, and there's nothing quite like getting it right when you're there in the field. You can also rotate this lens so that it shifts from left to right, or any angle in between. And another neat trick is that it can be used to make easily stitchable panorama images. Just shift the lens all the way to the left, take a shot, and then to the right, take another shot. Make sure to keep the exposure the same by shooting in manual mode, and stitch them together in editing for a high resolution panorama. Neat! So the shift function can be useful for architecture or landscape photography. However, on a telephoto lens it's not as effective as on a wider angle optic. The lens's tilt function allows you to literally tilt the front element of the lens, but only about 8mm or so. This has the effect of adjusting your plane of focus. For example, here I'm tilting the lens from left to right, adjusting the focal plane, leading to some areas being more or less out of focus. Again, this can be useful when shooting at an angle against your subject, but also on a lens as telephoto is 100mm, the effect isn't quite as dramatic as it is on a wide angle optic. So the tilt shift functionality of the lens is interesting and occasionally helpful, but I wouldn't view it as a deal breaker. Much more interesting to me is simply that 2x macro functionality. Just make sure you have a tripod or plenty of light to play with if you want to shoot this closely to your subject though. When it comes out this February, it will be available for L-mount cameras, Canon RF, Nikon Z, Micro Four Thirds, Fuji X and Sony E-mount cameras, and its price will be about $400, so actually that's quite a low price considering all the features you're getting here. I'd like to thank TTArtisan for sending me a copy of this lens for evaluation, although as usual this is a totally independent review. The lens itself, as you see, looks absolutely badass. It's beautifully designed and assembled, although also mildly uncomfortable to hold with all those knobs sticking out of the back. It's made of metal and it's very tough, although there's no sign of any serious weather sealing. The lens is totally manual focus, manual aperture, manual everything, although all tilt shift lenses and a lot of serious macro lens users shoot without autofocus anyway. Both the tilt and shift functions have tightening screws and turning dials for relatively easy control. Then comes the aperture ring, which has gentle clicks at every half an f-stop until you get down to the very darkest apertures, that is. The iris mechanism has 12 aperture blades. Then comes a broad metallic focus ring. While it looks really cool with its hyperfocal distance scale etched into the metal in different colours, it's not very precise. So at all magnifications I found focusing just a little bit tricky. I wish that focus ring turned more than 100 degrees is what I'm saying. Like many macro lenses, this thing suffers from a good deal of focus breathing, zooming right in as you focus more closely. In fact, this is really quite a serious case here. You can also see the image getting darker as I focus more closely, a natural effect of close magnification which will obviously affect your shutter speeds when doing macro photography. The front filter size of the lens is 67mm. It doesn't come with a hood, but it does come with a nice metallic lens cap that fits pretty securely over the front. Overall, I loved the build quality and rather sexy look of this lens, but I absolutely wish its focus ring turned a bit more precisely. Anyway, image quality. I'll be testing it today on a full frame camera, my 42MP Sony a7R III. In-camera corrections are not available on this lens. At f2.8, sharpness in the middle of the image is just good, and contrast just okay. Corner image quality continues to look quite good, although the very edges get a little soft. f4 looks much sharper in the edges and fantastically sharp and contrasty in the middle. f5.6 looks perfect in the middle and still very good in the corners, but not quite perfect there. f8 and f11 look about the same. So, image quality is quite good at f2.8, but you'll want to add a little contrast to your images at least. Stop down for excellent sharpness, although more expensive macro lenses will outperform it in the image corners here. Now let's take a look at distortion and vignetting. It's an excellent performance here, a negligible level of pincushion distortion and almost no vignetting. Stop down to f5.6 and any slight darkness in the corners is gone. Now, close-up image quality, important in a super macro lens. At f2.8 we see excellent sharpness and contrast right away at the closest distances. The lens stays this sharp down to f5.6. At this super close distance though, the softening effects of diffraction affect the image at much wider apertures, so f8 starts to look softer. f11 and f16 start looking far softer. So there's your macro sweet spot, anywhere between f2.8 and f5.6. Let's see how the lens performs against bright lights now. It's not great. Circular flaring patterns when bright lights are within the image frame, and broader flaring when the light is just outside of the image frame kind of spoil the party. Now let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. Out of focus backgrounds look mostly quite nice here, although they're not the softest I've ever seen, but I can't report anything untoward here, to be honest. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f2.8, a little colour fringing is visible on bokeh highlights, but stop down to f4 and it looks much better. Overall, this lens was interesting to me. As a 2x macro lens, its optical image quality is not up to the high standards of Venus Optics Laowa lenses, which are considerably sharper, but this lens is a bit cheaper, and some people might find the tilt-shift functionality quite useful, and more superficially, it looks really cool when mounted on your camera. If the tilt-shift thing is something you're interested in, on top of the macro capability, then this thing is quite recommendable. Alright, well, that was an interesting one. My workflow for these super macro lenses is quite simple. My wife uses her creative imagination to find every possible tiny subject in our household for me to photograph, and I use my boring technical skill to take the pictures. I guess we're a pretty good team. Thanks for watching everyone, and if you find these reviews helpful, then do check out my Patreon page, where supporters get all kinds of exclusive bonus content, and of course, a warm, fuzzy feeling inside for helping these reviews to keep trucking on. God bless everyone.